Hello everyone, my name is Yevin Jayapalika and I work for the Office of Media and Communications here at the Near East South Asia Center for Strategic Studies. We are here today with NESA Center Deputy Director and retired Colonel David Lamm to have a brief talk about the NESA Center. Deputy Director Lamm has brought to the NESA Center an impressive resume, including close to 30 years working with the U.S. Army with impressive postings at the Combined Forces Command, Joint Chiefs of Staff, and U.S. Army Central. Deputy Director Lamm has been with the NESA Center since 2008, serving a variety of leadership roles, and we are very lucky to have him today with us. Thank you, sir, for being with us. Do you mind just telling us a little bit more about yourself and some things you've done here at the NESA Center?
Sure would. And thank you for that wonderful introduction. Very undeserved, I think. But after, you're right, about 30 years in the military, I want to back up just a little and tell you how I wound up here. And that is through a series of Army and Joint Staff assignments. Back in 1999, before I went to the Army War College, I was posted to the Joint Staff in the J3, where I handled all the special plans, and one of those plans was for the Middle East. And we were working that with, at that time, the Central Command Commander, General Zinni. And it had to do with keeping a permanent forward presence after the first Gulf War in the Arabian Gulf. And in fact, that's where we began changing the name from Persian Gulf to Arabian Gulf. Basically keeping the footprint forward. So it called for 4,000 or 5,000 soldiers permanently deployed at that point to Camp Doha, Kuwait, in Kuwait City. It called for an air expeditionary group that would rotate in every 6 months, so you would have fighter aircraft to enforce Operation Southern Watch. And it called for a plus-up in the carriers, the aircraft carriers, and the building of the Fifth Fleet in Bahrain. So air, ground, Navy, all those components were worked into the plan. They were approved by the President, funded by the Congress, and you have to watch out what you plan, because I became the third or fourth commander of that greatly expanded mission in the Arabian Gulf, and therefore myself and my family for 2 years, 2.5, almost 3 years for me, spent that time from 2000. I was there when 9/11 occurred with my family. We remained there for an additional year. Family went home before we began the actual ground combat operations for the second Gulf War and against Iraq. And then I came home shortly after that and came, in fact, to the National War College to teach for about a year. Took about a year off. And I wouldn't say a year off. We work hard here at the National Defense University, but I was a professor at the National War College. And during that year, I was here, taught seminars, so on and so forth. And basically, there were seminars about what I had done, both on the classified and unclassified side. In fact, I had a classified class. We kind of rolled through that, and then while I was here, it's when Lieutenant General Dave Barno, a former NESA director, came to me. He was currently the commander of the Combined Forces Command in Afghanistan. He was looking for a chief of staff. They were going to expand the role of the American footprint in Afghanistan very quickly. 2003 this is. So from 2003 to 2005 I was his chief of staff in Afghanistan. And we worked the elections in Afghanistan, the election process, the first free elections in Afghanistan in many, many decades. And they were very successful with the presidential and parliamentary elections. I remained there with General Eikenberry, who later became the ambassador, served with Zal Khalilzad, some very good friends. And then returned here to the United States, went to OSD Policy, where I worked Afghan issues. Seems very logical after that. And then while I was there, General Barno came back to the Army staff. He retired, came to NESA as the director, and phoned me up and asked me if I would like to come over to the NESA Center and be his chief of staff. I had a very nice job, but moving here was probably one of the the best things I had ever done. I had extensive background as a soldier. In fact, when the Camp David Peace Accords were signed, my unit in the 82nd Airborne Division was the first unit in with the Egyptians. We retrained the Egyptian Airborne Brigade, the 3rd Devil Brigade. I was the lead for that retraining. We had the first MFO missions, multinational force observers missions in the Sinai. Pretty austere in those days, tents, water tower, that was about it. It's quite nice now. So I was enamored with the Middle East, even in the late 80s, early 80s. In 1983 is when the Camp David Accords were signed, and I was at Cairo West Air Base for several months with the Egyptian Airborne Brigade. So I went to graduate school after that and a number of things. So I was quite taken by the Middle East, particularly the problem sets that existed in the region. And it seems, looking back in hindsight, to know a little bit about me, looking back in retrospect, that the stuff kind of built on itself. And particularly the assignment to Kuwait, and then the follow-on assignment to Afghanistan. So I was very familiar. The Kuwaitis were, after 9/11, wonderful allies to the United States. Gave us a great deal of financial support in kind to do the operation in Afghanistan. So it was very, very rewarding. And so I had a lot of background when I arrived here, and got here in about 2007. And as you know, we were in the middle of two wars. One in Afghanistan, which I was very, very familiar with. One in Iraq, which I was familiar with. Had been there one time, but wasn't an expert on it like I was in Afghanistan. But the counterinsurgency, counter set were the same. I had a great many friends that served in Iraq, and so came back here, and in 2007, and then moved here in 2008, as you mentioned. And at that time, both wars were going, and NESA was in the process of expanding the centers. In fact, all the regional centers, the 5 regional centers, were getting additional money to do work. But the key one that they wanted to expand was the NESA Center, because the problem sets, Iraq, Afghanistan, terrorism, were all in the NESA footprint and the U.S. Central Command footprint. So we very rapidly began to expand. I remember when I got here, we had just one hallway in the old Coast Guard building. Many of our alumni are aware of the old Coast Guard building. It's where they became alum and went to class. But we had one hallway, 10 professors, 11 professors, a very, very small staff. And within about a 3-year period, we grew to about 75 people. And of course, when the war ended, we contracted, and the budgets went down, and we contracted. But during that time, General Barno and I resolved to do a couple of things. Number one, when we were in Afghanistan, both of us, and we wanted to do an interagency and academic look at the counterinsurgency in Afghanistan, we looked around for an organization to do it. And quite frankly, in 2003, late 2003, early 2004, we didn't even know the NESA Center existed. And we were looking for an organization that was focused on the Middle East, that had an academic ties, and had a reputation for pulling some things together. So we looked about and essentially ran the first academic conference on the counterinsurgency in Afghanistan, in fact, at the George C. Marshall Center, because we did know about it. It was in Garmisch. We could fly there and bring participants there. But name recognition for NESA, which was founded in 2000 and really got going, it was only about 3 years old. Not many people knew about it. The Marshall Center had been around for years. Many people knew that. So one of the things General Barno and I wanted to do when we arrived here together was become the first organization of choice for U.S. Central Command when it needed to do academic events, seminars, workshops, so on and so forth. So we created a liaison team at CENTCOM, Command Sergeant Major Cindy Pritchett, now retired, just Miss Pritchett, is currently there, and we posted Professor Richard Russell there. They are there in the J5, the strategy shop of U.S. Central Command. So we placed them there to get our name recognition with U.S. Central Command as we worked issues with U.S. Central Command, operational issues. That was the other thing we really attempted to do, and that was to be a very positive and real benefit to actual wartime planners, because there were 2 wars going on. I think we both thought that at the time the organization was very, very academic. If you look at some old calendars, you'll see it ran 6 or 7 seminars a year. It did some track 2 with the University of Los Angeles in California, and that was about it. There was no work being done directly with U.S. Central Command, no work being done directly with U.S. AFRICOM in North Africa, and we wanted to change that, so we pushed ahead and did that. And if you look today at the calendar, there are scores of events with both Central Command, U.S. Africa Command, and one of the other things that we did is we moved very quickly to establish a forward office, a presence in the region. And that was for recognition as well. And we placed that forward office, a very young guy we sent out there, a guy by the name of Meyer. Mr. Meyer went out, and we coordinated with the U.S. Navy in Bahrain, the Fifth Fleet, and we established a forward office there. And we did a good deal of work with Admiral Fox, who was the first commander out there, and then he later on became the deputy commander at CENTCOM, but he was the Fifth Fleet commander. So we did seminars for him, we brought academics to Bahrain, we established the forward office, and then very rapidly from there came the call for building a national defense university in the United Arab Emirates. So one thing kind of led to the next. We had a forward office in Bahrain, and we said, well, what we could do is we can move that element, Zach Meyer, who was there, Mr. Meyer, and we'll move him down the Gulf to the Emirates, and he and a professor here put together basically the curriculum for the National Defense College in the United Arab Emirates, put together the faculty development program. We screened and hired faculty, put together the contract to build that organization. It was a 3-year foreign military sales case contract, and essentially in about 9 months, which is rather remarkable, went from the United Arab Emirate Crown Prince asking his staff to establish a college, I believe it was in November of, well, you say in November, and he wanted to start school the following September. So about 9 months. And so about the time it takes to have a baby, we birthed the UAE National Defense College. And it's running along. It's now in its second 3-year contract. So we're very proud of that effort, getting it down there. So name recognition, close coordination with the real combatant commanders and fulfilling their requirements. Setting up the UAE. We had a Track 2 program with the University of Ottawa that had been running for some time. It was fairly robust. And we expanded it. We added to it the University of California at Los Angeles, which had been going on for a number of years, but we began directly funding it with year-end money. So we were doing all of our Track 2 operations, if the audience understands, with end-of-year money. So you didn't really know what the funding was going to be for the next year because it came at the end of the previous year, and then you paid forward. And that was an awkward way to do business. And it became difficult to lure others in because there was no real seed money that was already committed by the United States. So several years ago, we worked very hard with the current director, Terry Wolf, to fund that as part of the normal budget for NESA every year. So there's about over $1 million that we use to fund the Track 2 programs. And they include, from oldest to youngest, the University of California, Los Angeles, and they have a Middle East program that's run by a wonderful professor out there, Mr. Spiegel, Dr. Spiegel. Then the Ottawa Track 2. We work with the University of Ottawa, Canada, and those are smaller events. The UCLA events are kind of like a large cup of coffee, big group meeting, 400 or 500 participants broken down into small groups. The Ottawa seminars are very discreet. They had to do initially with India and Pakistan and strategic issues, nuclear issues, and counterterrorism issues between the two, border security issues. Then as the Afghan set grew in 2004, 5, and 6, there's an Afghan, Pakistan, and India component of all of that. And we began to work those very, very closely. They've expanded into under the University of Ottawa umbrella. In fact, the writing, the basis of the U.S.-Iran nuclear deal in the Accord. So we're very proud of all of that work. The Ottawa Track 2 is directly responsible several years ago of getting the new Prime Minister of Afghanistan and Pakistan together, Pakistan and India, together, Modi and Sharif. It came right out of a Track 2 meeting, of getting those two together. High-ranking folks attend those Track 2 meetings and then go back, would write op-eds, advise their governments. So that's the key of the Track 2. Former high-ranking people that we bring together to talk about serious and discrete issues, and then they go back and inform their governments and advise their governments, and then hopefully that turns into government-to-government activity, Track 1 activity that moves some real progress. We forged, I talked about the nuclear agreement, getting the prime ministers together. Incidents at sea, if two ships bump into each other, particularly between Pakistan and India, we worked those things out. And about 2 months after we signed that agreement, an Indian and Pakistani ship doing counter piracy operations ran into each other, and you basically could use that template to keep things from escalating.
Our region has faced quite a lot of turmoil. Certainly in the last
That's an understatement.
in the last few years.
Yes.
With the ongoing threats of extremism and the threat of Daesh. Do you have a message for our partners and allies in the region?
I sure do. First of all, to our allies that are working very hard, losing treasure, losing people, the more important soldiers in the war on Daesh, what we call ISIL here in the administration. Our director currently is in fact the special presidential envoy for countering ISIL or Daesh in the region, and he's working very, very hard every day. He's not here. He's working for the White House. We're very proud of that he would have been selected to do that. So I would tell all of our friends in the region and our alumni that the United States is committed to that. I think both Terry and I would have hoped that we would have been a bit more committed, a great deal more committed, earlier in particularly the Syrian crisis with the refugees. But we don't make policy. We help and execute policy for the President of the United States and the National Command Authority. So it is what it is. We're working very, very hard on that message every day, and working hard on the problem directly. Terry Wolf directly. Former NESA professor Najim El-Jabouri, who is the Major General selected by the Prime Minister of Iraq as commander of the Nineveh campaign. General Wolf and he met in Erbil just last week to talk about the reduction of Mosul, having captured Ramallah. Now to move on to Mosul. That's a large city. It's about the size of Washington, D.C., and that it has to be taken. And we are working very, very closely with the Iraqis and the other forces on the ground, the U.S. forces, and logistical assistance to work that problem with with Daesh. They are going to lose, okay, eventually. It's just a matter of time. And personally, me to our alumni and our folks in the region, every hour, every day that is not resolved is another tragic day where innocent people are hurt and killed, and that's a tragedy. But we can only go as fast as we can go. So that's the Daesh set. To our friends in the region, particularly on the Arabian Peninsula and Gulf, the United States has signed an agreement, a nuclear agreement with Iran. It is contentious. It's not only contentious in the region, because we've heard from many of our friends in the region. It's contentious here in the United States. And recent revelations, about money moving and so on and so forth in conjunction with hostages and the Iran deal, in the middle of a political season, which we are in, electing there will be a new administration in January. Don't know who that will be. That's up to the American electorate, but we will see, and that means we will see about longer-term policy in the Middle East. I think Mrs. Clinton, if she is elected, would be a bit more hawkish and a bit more deliberate in the Middle East. We will see. Donald Trump, not quite so sure, but we will see who's elected and how all of that goes. But the message, the underlying message for the region is, when it comes to Daesh, when it comes to freedom of transit, we had the recent incident with the Iranian speedboats and the U.S. destroyer. We will do what we've always have been doing in the Middle East, in particular the Gulf, for the last 20 or 30 years, and that is maintain freedom of navigation, freedom for the oil and the other economies to move, free trade, maritime security, free trade, keeping the Gulf a nuclear-free zone. Is very important to us. I think that's what they had in mind. I know that's what they had in mind in the administration as they pursued the Iranian deal. Whether the Iranians have that in mind is something we will have to wait and see. If they pursue a nuclear weapon, then that's another strategic decision point that the United States and our allies and friends in the region are going to have to deal with. The promise was that they might not, so we will go with that and take them at their word, which may be naive, but we will go ahead with that. But nevertheless, we are committed to those things, and we have many friends and allies in the region, both here in the United States, from the region, and in the region. I have many personal friends in the region. There have been many Americans who've served there. Soldiers, airmen, Marines, and I think that as a country, we are committed to the region for the long haul. We have to work through the last 15 years. That's been expensive for the United States, both in blood, U.S. American servicemen, and treasure and money. And so some Americans, you'll hear this all the time. There's this notion that the Americans are fatigued with this and so on and so forth. And it's our longest war since 9/11, been dragging out. We're still in Afghanistan. It's over 15 years. Look, we've stayed more than 15 years in many places. We were in Europe for 50. We're still in Korea and Japan, helping and assisting there. Since the turn of the century, we've had a footprint in the Philippines, where we had a very, very, very small army. In fact, with General MacArthur's father, Arthur MacArthur. So we're dedicated to those principles: free trade, maritime security, rule of law in countries, and we will continue to march that way. And that just doesn't go with the change in governments. That's kind of the hallmark of American citizens and what they want the world to look like. So I think that's a very positive message. And I know for many in the region, it's like, well, we really can't trust. We got to give up on the Americans. I would say that even with American support and continued American support, to work these things amongst themselves in the region, our regional friends getting together, which is the key, the hallmark of NESA. More than them coming here and learning about the United States and how we do business, the most important thing that happens is they all get together and find out how they each other do business, and they can solve these regional issues by themselves, with some assistance from the United States if they ask for it. But that's the key. That is the real pearl of what NESA affords. It's getting all of the folks from the region together to bring them together to solve their own national security problems in the region.
Thank you very much for your time, David.
Thank you very much.